Hey guys, I just wanted to welcome you back to the channel, and I wanted to do a video on music theory, which is kind of a dry subject for a lot of us, but it is super important. It's a good way to understand how we build chords and how we can understand how to play what sounds good in a certain key signature, or even down the road if we want to change keys. So I figured I would start with the basics. So if you're already have some knowledge about music theory, I'm going to get there maybe in the next video, but I want to talk about the notes. In Western music, there's only 12 notes, C to B written on the board, and I just wanted to talk about something that can be confusing for a lot of people: enharmonic equivalence. So it just means the same note has two different names. That's what I'm trying to say. So when you get to C, you have C, C sharp can also be called D flat. It's the same note, we just call it something different depending on the key signature. So there's that. If you want to pause that, you can see every enharmonic equivalent on the board. D sharp's the same as E flat, F sharp's the same as G flat, G sharp's the same as A flat, A sharp's the same as B flat. And it's important to notice we never have a whole step. There's always just a half step between E and F, and also C and B. I know I wrote it over there like that, but always between C and B. If you know anything about a piano, you can see there's two white keys next to one another on a couple of occasions. That would be C and B, and E and F. So just remember that. It's important to remember that. Let me grab my eraser. If you got all that, it's really basic. That's just all 12 notes. There's only 12 notes in Western music. Okay, now I just wanted to take a key signature. The basic key signature that we all work with is the key of C. It's just the simplest because we have no sharps and no flats. We just call everything by its normal name. So I want to take the key of C and just explain how the major scale is set up and how we build chords off that major scale. So this is great for bass players, guitar players, anybody who plays an instrument, or even if you're just a vocalist. This is great for you to understand how to sing harmony and actually be able to put a name to what you're doing. So if you're singing a harmony and someone says, hey, can you sing the third above that C note that I'm singing? You know, okay, well, I'm gonna try to hit two steps up is an E. So I'm gonna write out the C scale so we can see what that looks like. I'm gonna run out of room. I guess I can do it. I might have to move my bass. All right, so I just wanted to show you in the major scale, this is something you should also memorize. When we're talking about a major scale, this would be the key of C major. So we're gonna look through there. I just wanted to emphasize the intervals that are between each note, which just means the space between each note. So right here we have a whole step. I'm gonna write a W for whole step. We have another whole step. This is something my dad used to tell me and I never used to understand it. This one's a half step. So remember, between E and F, we always have a half step. If E and F are next to each other, it's only a half step. Another whole step. Another whole step. Another whole step. W means whole, and then back to C. I'm going to write it right here. Back to the root. Let's get rid of this bass guitar. Sorry about that, guys. Hopefully you can see this over here. We have a half step. So if we're talking major key, it could be C sharp, it could be D sharp, it could be B flat, whatever key you're in, this pattern stays the same. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step back to the root. So if there was a B over here, we just have a half step, right? Okay, that's really basic. Something that you just memorize. Take a good hard look at it. If you're taking notes, pause the video and just take a look at that. Give you a second. Okay, now I'm going to just erase the bottom part. You've got that together. We know the difference between a whole step and a half step. hopefully. So a whole step just means it's 2 half steps. So there would be, technically there's a C sharp between C and D, right? But we don't play it when we're in the key of C. It's not a regular part of the key of C. It could be there as an accidental or as a passing tone, something like that. But I wanted to show how we build chords from the C scale. I'm going to write out all of the C major triads in the key of C, and then I want to go through what we call them. So this is something that maybe you bass players out there, it's just really good foundational knowledge to know what notes are within a C major chord, what notes are within a D minor chord, and how does that fit together, and how does that make sense? So you have to help me here with questions in the comments about what you want to learn. I can point you in the right direction to the right resources. I know I'm not the best person to explain this, but I'm giving it the old college try. So we're going to have, with any chord structure, I'm just going to show you the pattern of how we build chords. And this is, again, something you're going to memorize, all right? So let's just go through. We're going to call C the 1, because it is the first note in the key of C. I'm going to write a lowercase 2, Roman numerals. This just keeps it straight. We're going to label each note in the key of C. I'll tell you why I'm doing lowercase in a minute. Lowercase 3, uppercase 4, under F, uppercase 5, lowercase 6, and I'm going to leave the lowercase 7. Okay, so we've got 1 through 7. Those are our notes in the key of C. In any given major key, there's only 7, and so that's how it's going to roll. So our first chord is always going to be a major chord, and I want you to just memorize this because it'll make sense to you as you go along. I'm going to write major. Your second chord in the key is always going to be a minor chord, min. And you can also write an M for those Roman numerals so that we know it's a 2 minor. So you call this the 1 major, C major. That's what the triad would be called, the chord, C major. D minor, going to be E minor. So this pattern follows every key. F happens to be major, that's why we write uppercase. Everything that's minor, we write a lowercase. G is another major. A is a minor. The 6 chord is minor. 5 chord major, 6 chord minor. The 7 chord, I want you to just memorize this, is actually diminished. It's a different type of chord. So I'm going to write dim. And you can also write, I forgot to write my M here. You can also just write a little, you can symbolize that through writing a little circle, kind of like you would write an exponent in math. You just write a little circle above there. So I'll show you what each of those things mean in a second. So just memorize this pattern. If you go along, it goes major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. The 7 chord's always diminished. That just happens to be how the notes lay out for the 7 chord triad, which means 3 notes. Each of these chords are going to be 3 notes. So I hope you can see this toward the bottom. I'm going to kind of leave this up. But we have C. So what makes a major chord? I'm going to show you. C, E, and G. Those 3 notes make a major triad. And the reason it's major is because of the distance between each of these notes. So if we go along, we say C, E, and G. So if we label these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we're playing the first note in the key of C, the 3rd note in the key of C, and the 5th note in the key of C. So that's how the pattern's going to go as we go along. It's going to be the same for each. And you can think of it also this way. C, skip a note, E, skip a note, G. And just like a piano on your triads, if you were to look and play those 3 notes, play a white key starting on C, skip a white key, play the next white key, skip a white key, play the next key. this is what you end up with, and we call it C major. And it's because, the reason we call it major is because of this middle note right here, E. Now if this was flatted, we would call it a minor chord. It would have a different tone to it and a different sound. I think in the next video, I might actually give you something to listen to, play on the guitar or something, and give you the difference between a major and a minor key. Everyone's heard these in every music out there you can imagine. Major, minor, and you've probably heard diminished chords in some music. Most likely, especially if you like jazz, you've definitely heard diminished chords. So now we're going to go to D minor, that's what we call it. So we're on C major, moving on to D minor. So this is going to be D. So we can build a chord now because we know the pattern. We're just starting on the second note. So 2, skip a note. What if we got? We'll just call this the 1. In this case, we're going to make this the 1 because we're talking about a D triad. So can you think of the next note? What would be the next note if I went with the same pattern? Just think about it. The F. Skip a note, F. And this happens to be a minor chord because of the distance between these two notes. The third is what determines whether it's major or minor. If you have a major third, it's just that 2 steps away, 1, 2, 2 steps away in this case, but between E and F, we only have a half step, right? So really, this is a minor third because we're only going a step and a half. So a step and a half makes a minor chord, and we call that a flatted third. So D major would actually be D, F sharp, and we go along, A. That would be D major, but F sharp is not in the key of C. So the 2 chord happens to be minor if you're staying to the diatonic structure of the scale. Diatonic's a fancy word for stay in the right key, dude. So here we go. C, D, we got D, F, A. This is your minor triad for D on the 2 chord. 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord. I'm just going to write these out. You can see the pattern. We're going to have E, skip a note, G, skip a note, B. So this would happen to be a minor chord because we have a minor third. You guys will have to let me know if I completely lose you on this. This is how I look at it, and it helps me to understand it this way. So we're going to move on to the 4 chord. The 4 chord happens to be major. So we're going to go F, skip a note, A, skip a note, C. Oops, over here. So these are your triads. We're going along. We got G. The 5 chord happens to be a major chord as well. Major, minor, minor, major, major. G, skip a note. B, skip a note. D, because we're going back to there. All right. Fantastic. I'm just trying not to make a mistake. This is simple stuff, but also it's kind of complicated. A, your 6 chord, happens to be a minor chord. So we're going to go A, C, E, right? A, skip a note. C, skip a note. E, ace. The ace chord. And so here we go with the diminished chord. B, we're going to just follow the same pattern. B, skip a note. D. Skip a note. F. Take a brief look at diminished chords for a second. So now let's just look at the space between each of these notes. What we talked about is intervals. So intervals are the space between notes. We've got a major third there and a minor third there. Sorry, that's a new term. But we got a diminished chord here. So we have a minor third, right? B and C is a half step to D is a whole step. So we've got our minor third, okay? We got a minor third there, but we also have what we call a diminished fifth. A perfect fifth would be if we were to play F sharp, and that would be a perfect fifth. But actually, we only have what we call a tritone between these, 3 half steps between B and F, and that makes it diminished. So if I were to give you a diminished chord, we would say it's the 1, in this case B, it would be the flatted third and the flatted fifth. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out for you guys along here. Minor chords are going to be the 1, flatted 3rd, regular or perfect 5th. If you want to be correct, it's the perfect 5th. So that's your minor pattern here. Your major pattern is a 1, a 3, and a 5. I hope y'all can see that. So here we are. So that's the 3 different kinds of chords. You got diminished, minor, major. And so I hope this makes sense. Take a good hard look at it. I'm going to see how it's looking up here. It looks like you can see my board all right, except for that G, huh? This light. It's difficult to see it a little bit. I'm a rookie, if you couldn't tell, so I don't have fancy lighting. So anyway, take a look at that. Ask me questions. This is just stuff that you memorize. So if you're a bass player and you're reading sheet music, say you're on a worship team, which I was for a long time, they'd give you sheet music with the lyrics on it and then chords above that. And they really didn't give you a lot of direction other than, well, listen to the song and see how it goes. But you know that if we're playing in the key of C, then I know that C is the 1, and I can play a C note, an E note, or a G note, and it'll probably sound all right. Maybe not always, but you could use some cool passing things like we talked about in the first video. If you haven't seen the first video, you can go back and check that out, where we use the major scale and then use our ear to identify some different notes to throw in between each chord. So then you know, if the song is in the key of C, it'll say right on the sheet music, key of C. You know that if there's a G chord, you can play these 3 notes right here. G, B, and D make up that G triad, G major triad, and it happens to always be the 5 chord. And when you start to memorize these things, you can listen to music and go, oh, I heard a D minor, an E minor, and an F. And you can start to deduce, that's a fancy word, deduce what key it is. And you can start to listen to things, and you'll hear patterns over and over and over again. Every pop song, a lot of rock songs, a lot of everything. Contemporary music is built on this, and it's not that complicated. It looks like a lot, but it's just stuff that you memorize. So if you just memorize any key, if we're in D, it doesn't matter. If we're in D major, we can go through that. It just changes with the sharps and flats, what you're going to call things. So, but you follow the same pattern. You write out all the, say, let's take G for example, because there's only 1 sharp, F sharp. Say you're going to take G. Okay, we know there's 1 F sharp in there. You'd basically just put a sharp on that, and you do the same pattern. You'd start with G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, back to G. And you would do the same pattern. You could figure out every triad. They would just be called, they would have different notes in different places. You'd have that F sharp in there instead of an F major. So, and then we'll probably talk about the circle of fifths later. But I wanted to just hit this basic music theory, because this helps me a lot. Instead of just saying, oh, well, what, you're really confused. You're like, what do I play? How can I play well? How can I get from C to E minor to F, back to D minor, back to C? And you can start to look at these things and go, oh, okay, well, if we're playing C to E, I can play C, looks like there's a G in E minor, so I could play C, G, back to E, and look how they share notes. You've got an E here and an E here, you've got a G here and a G here. The different notes are B and C. So you could probably mess around with some cool things. You're playing C and somebody plays an E minor, you could probably lay onto that B if you're a bass player, and it kind of sounds different, interesting. And you just use your ear to figure out what you like, because everybody has their preferences. Let's move on. So I just wanted to emphasize, I wanted to hit on the 4 different kinds of chords just one more time. There's actually 4. We got major, we've got minor, we've got diminished, and we've got something called augmented. Now, if you're playing in a worship team, you'll probably never see an augmented chord. You might not ever see an augmented chord unless you're a jazz musician, maybe. Let's go ahead and erase this. I'm not really going to be in any sort of key, but I'm just going to show you with numbers. Major, if I'm just reviewing here, major is that root, 3rd, and 5th. Always. That's what a major chord is. And you can add There's extended chords as well, but I don't want to go into it for the sake of clarity. We've got a 1 for our minor chord, always a flatted or a half step lower than a regular third. We take that down a half step and you get a minor third between these two notes. And then you play what we call the perfect fifth. It's a perfect fifth. That's an interval. It's just what we call it. 5 notes up. Diminished. We've got a 1. Our 1 looks funky. We got a flatted third. And we got a flatted fifth or diminished fifth. Let's write it a little bigger here, huh? It's hard to write. It's hard to write and talk at the same time. That 5 doesn't want to go on there. So diminished is a root, your root note, whatever it is. If it's C, G, A, B, C, D, whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the 1, the flatted third, and the diminished fifth, or you can call this is what, so you got your minor third here, min 3, and between your 1 and your 5, you've got what's called a tritone. I'm not going to write that. It's 3 half steps. Da, da, da. 3 half steps. Tritone. It's kind of a funky sound. Some people call it the devil's interval. I don't. It's whatever. It just sounds different. Different kind of chord. Let's see if I don't mess up this augmented chord. So, augmented. Hopefully I'm getting this right. I don't mess with augmented chords a whole lot. We got a root. We got a major third. And then we got what's called a sharp or augmented fifth. So we keep our major third just like we had from our major chord, and now we have an augmented fifth. And I know these two chords, really not something you're going to use a whole lot in most music. I love diminished chords, honestly. I love the way they sound when you use them as passing chords between, like, say you're going to play C, D. This right here, try this if you can. C, C sharp, diminished. Where was I going? D minor. So we can stay kind of in the key of C. Something like that. I love this passing tone between these chords. This adds what we call tension in music. It doesn't sound quite right. It sounds a little off. Both of these chords are very, I like to call them dramatic. Minor's a little dramatic, kind of a sad sounding chord. Major's happy, sad sounding a little bit, although it's up to your opinion and your interpretation of what that sounds like. So get it in your head. Maybe next video I'll just go through the different chords and how they sound. Major, minor, diminished is kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just off sounding. There's a lot of tension because of that sharp 5 against that flatted third and the 1 and just the way that it's set up. And the augmented chord, I call it the surprise chord. It always feels like if you ever played like, what was it, Metal Gear Solid or like Tomb Raider, when something happened, ooh, it's like this chord that happened, and I always feel like when I hear an augmented chord, I'm like, ooh, there's a surprise, like you found something behind a bush or behind something. So I call it the surprise chord. Diminished, I have no idea what to call it. It's a sad, dissonant chord if you're going to be proper with your language. But anyway, this kind of progression is neat, the way you can sort of manipulate these things to sound and give a different feel. So I feel like I'm done for this video. You guys can let me know in the comments what you want to learn more of, but this is kind of a basic way to figure out what in the world can I play over these certain chords. I got a chord sheet in front of me, and it says C, D minor, G, F, and you know that you can play all those root notes, maybe as a bass player. Or you know that on the guitar you can play those. But as a lead guitarist, you're going to play melodies, or you're going to play different notes, and you want to play what sounds good. And that's where your skill building and your learning your scales and learning all these other things will help you out, because they're like a map to what sounds good. Again, music theory is like a toolbox that you have all your tools in your truck. It's the tools you have in your truck in the back. You hope your truck never breaks and you never have to use your tools. Well, when the music breaks and it doesn't sound good, then you have these tools to go, well, why doesn't it sound good? Why am I playing this F sharp over this, say, F chord, and it doesn't sound good, or it doesn't sound right, or it's off? It doesn't necessarily sound wrong, it just doesn't sound how you want it to sound. So music theory just gives you a map as to what sounds good together in general, and that's really, really up to interpretation. Music's very open, it's a very artistic thing. You learn all these rules, and then you spend the rest of your time learning how to break those rules in a fancy, what's the word? Sort of a fancy, the way you interpret it. You want to be artistic in an artistic way. So that's why us musicians are called artists. Oh, and anyway, I guess so say you got a chord, you would just write C for a major chord. Somebody might write major, but that usually means you're going to play the 7, but we're not going to get into 7s yet. But usually, if you just see the note on a chord sheet and it says C, it means C major, root third fifth. If it was a C minor, you know that it's a minor, so you'd flat that 5, right? You'd flat that 5, or sorry, not the 5, the third. Come on, Josh. You'd flat that third. Same chord, it would still be C, but this would be E flat now, and now it would stay G, right? Because this would be C, E, G. Let's just reinforce that. C, E, G is regular, root, third, fifth. All right, major chord, minor chord, root, flatted third, fifth. I'm going over this again just because I know it's difficult to get it all in your head with all the symbols and everything. If this is new to you, it's going to sound difficult. So that's how you write a C minor chord. If you see that on sheet music, that's what that means. C diminished, you'll see a dim symbol like that, or you might simply just see the circle like that. I kind of like the circle, it's lazier, it's easier to do. So, sorry, I was going to write this down for you. C, E, flat, G for your minor chord. Then we're going to write C. We got our regular root. The root stays the same. See that? Cool. Yeah, I see that, Josh. E flat, G, flat. I almost didn't say flat. C, E flat, G flat. Cool. That's a diminished chord. Sounds kind of interesting. Woo! Let's do our augmented chord. Let me get rid of that minor third nonsense in there. So for our augmented C, can you guess? It's going to be a C. So augmented chords usually look like this. You can write this aug after that, or you can write a plus symbol. And I kind of just think of that as you're just raising that fifth a half step. So that's how she goes. C, major third. We're back to E again. And G what? G sharp. Because that's what an augmented chord is. Anyway, I hope this helps you. Basic music theory. I think the next thing I want to talk about is intervals and go into depth with the intervals, because everything I talked about today was about intervals, and it's actually something that's difficult for me to explain, so I'm getting better at it. But we've got a third between these and a fifth between this. That's why it's called the root third and fifth. You just kind of innately start to pick these things up because you're just learning them. And there's 1,000 books out there. I'm sure there's 1,000 online resources. I can try to put some stuff in the comments or in the description rather that will point you in the right direction. There's books for guitar players, there's books for bass players, and this is usually in there somewhere. If it's a beginner book, you're going to learn this basic music theory, and this is going to be your flashlight in the darkness. I think I'm about done. That's it for me, guys. We'll see you later. We'll see you next video.